Sin más preámbulos, empezamos. Reloj, 9 minutos. El primer contrincante, el rabino Shmuley Boteach. Welcome. Do you see how tall I am and how tall Daniel Dennett is? I mean, does this look like this is a fair match? My friends, a man is on his deathbed, and his priest says to him, before you die in your last moments, renounce Satan and condemn his evil. And the man is silent. And the priest says again, these are your last moments of life, renounce Satan and condemn his evil. And still the man is silent. And the priest says, why will you not finally renounce Satan? And the man lifts his head up to his full stature. He looks at the priest and he says, Father, until I know where I'm going, I'm not antagonizing anybody. What's it been like for all of you who raised your hands to say that you're on the side of religion? To hear speaker after speaker, scientist after scientist, tell you that you are nothing but a superstitious, backward, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. Don't you know that science has replaced religion? In fact, in the one slide I'm going to use, miracles of modern technology. Okay, now you see the evolution of man? That guy over there at the very end, that's the evolutionary scientist. If you count a few back, you get the man who believes that the Apollo landing was in a television studio. Just behind him is the man who believes that the earth is flat. And all the way on the bottom, the guy like this, he believes that Elvis is still alive. And just behind him is the guy who believes in God. We're too mature to play games. Religion involves not much more faith than science. First of all, if we want to believe in God because we're afraid of death, would we really have invented a God who judges us after death? Is that comforting? On the contrary, if you were someone who ran a crematory at Auschwitz, what would you prefer to believe? That there's a God who's going to catch up to you and enact justice? Or that you can escape in the silence of the grave? In fact, Aldous Huxley said that atheism itself has intellectual reasons for the dismissal of God. Aldous Huxley was from the most famous of all evolutionary families. He said, I had reasons for the world not to have meaning. The philosophy of meaningless was an instrument of my liberation from morality because it interfered with my sexual freedom. Which is very nice. First of all, that there's a scientist who can be very forthright and candid. And secondly, it's nice to know there's still a guy in England having sex. Now, my friends, let's first begin with the faith inherent in science. Science says that a series of genetic mistakes, genetic mutations, led to the great complexity of our world. How complex? Well, if the Earth wasn't tilted 23 degrees on its axis, giant mountains of ice would be caused by the water vapor from the oceans. It would decimate life on Earth. If the Earth did not rotate 1,000 miles an hour on its own axis, if it were slower, it would freeze seedlings at night. It would scorch plants during the day. If the moon were any closer to our planet, then the tides would bring the oceans and make life on Earth impossible. The problem, however, is that genetic mutation, according to the scientists themselves, is so rare, about 1 in 1,000 is a DNA mutation, and second, they're never beneficial. These are mistakes. A.J. Miller is the man who devoted more study than any other individual to mutations. He says, the great majority of all mutations, certainly well over 99%, are harmful, as to be expected of the effect of an accidental occurrence. Mueller goes on to say, and he won a Nobel Prize, good mutations are so rare that we can consider them all bad. Now, how many mutations would it take, for example, to create a horse? Well, for that we go to Julian Huxley, one of the world's most famous evolutionists. He says, a proportion of favorable mutations of 1 in 1,000 does not sound like much, but it's probably an understatement. With this proportion, get ready for this, we should have to breed 1 million strains, 1,000 squared, to get one containing 2 favorable mutations, and so on up to 1,000 to the millionth power, if you can even understand numbers these big, to get something containing 1 million. 1,000 to the millionth power is one with 3 million zeros after it. It would take 3 books of 500 pages just to write it. Now, why would anyone believe in this? The answer is simple. Science says given enough time, anything can happen. But if you speak about an infinity of time, how different is that to an infinite God? This becomes semantics. The two become almost too similar to distinguish. And I'm not saying evolution didn't happen. It could very well be that evolution is true. In fact, as someone who believes in the Bible also speaks about the progression from the mineral to the vegetable to the animal to the intellectual, an evolutionary progression. I'm simply saying the numbers this big, and Sam Harris is speaking right after me, address this. You're talking about numbers, you can have all the time in the world, and something that has 300,000 zeros after it, how could it possibly take place without some sort of guiding hand? My friends, religion isn't really only about how the world is created, and that's just a sideshow. The chapters in Genesis that deal with the creation of the world are only 2 or 3. What religion really is the most radical statement in the history of the world, which is that every single one of you possesses the power to choose the kind of person you want to be. There is a God who gave us moral commandments, and that without God, then the laws of do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery are nothing but euphemisms for personal taste. Because if there isn't a God, who is the ultimate arbiter and the standard by which these laws have definition, then all we have are 2 different people who are disagreeing. I want Sam Harris to please address. A child is born and he has severe Down syndrome. He will never be anything but a burden to his parents. He has a financial strain. Special needs children often even ruin the marriages of their parents. Why should we not euthanize that child? We get so upset that Hitler euthanized the infirm. But doesn't that sort of make sense? In fact, Francis Crick, who won a Nobel Prize for the DNA molecule, mapping the DNA molecule, said that we should really define birth as 2 days after parturition so that a baby could be examined for defects. And if those defects were sufficiently deleterious, we could declare the child to not yet have been born. The only reason we keep that child alive, even though we all live in societies of limited resources, is because life is sacred, not because of the quality of life, but the sanctity of life. There is no rational reason. Somewhere right now, there is a police officer in the north of Mexico, and he barely earns enough money to support his family. And a drug dealer wants to give him a few extra bucks to look the other way while they smuggle cocaine into the United States. And no one's ever going to find out, and no one's ever going to see, and no one's ever going to know. Tell me one reason that police officer should not take the money when he needs it for his family. Give me one moral reason other than the idea that there is justice in the world and that we have the power to choose our moral character. Everything we've heard in this conference is that people almost have no choice. Science seems to be going against choice. Biological determinism, genetic predisposition. Freud said we're far less masters of our own mental household than we otherwise suppose, and out of control id and ego. But religion says that at every moment you have the power to choose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will have to be very cautious with the timing to all of you. Very punctual. Just 1 second. Sam, welcome. Para que los que no sepan, el rabino Shmuley Boteach, que entre otros libros tiene grandes obras como Kosher Adultery, ha sido autor de más de 12 libros, tiene un gran programa en el canal de Oprah, que todos probablemente han oído quién es Oprah, acaba de escribir sobre Michael Jackson, ha sido un orador extraordinario de la comunidad judía, además en Oxford University, y como ustedes pueden ver, es un gran pensante. De la misma manera, ahora quiero presentarles a Sam Harris. Cuando ustedes lean el libro de Sam Harris, Una carta a una nación cristiana, es un libro así de pequeño, así de pesado. Es uno de los libros más fuertes, más lacerantes, más pensantes, que defienden y que atacan cada uno de los puntos de vista. Defiende a la ciencia, ataca a la religión. Con ustedes, este brillante y pensante ser humano, Sam Harris. Welcome.
Well, it's a great honor to be here. It seems to have fallen to me and my colleagues, Christopher and Dan, to argue against God in what I am now told is the most religious state in your nation. I'm encouraged by the show of hands here. I just want to assure those of you who are religious here that our purpose is not to offend you this morning, but I will nevertheless repay your hospitality by telling you exactly what I think about religion. Now, as someone who has spent the last 2 years criticizing religious faith, I've become quite familiar with how people of faith rise to the defense of God. As it turns out, there are not 100 ways of doing this. There appear to be just 3. Either you argue that a specific religion is true, or you argue that religion is useful, or you attack atheism as intolerant, elitist, or otherwise corrosive of basic human values. Now, the only line of argument that is relevant to this debate, or indeed any debate about the validity of religion, is an argument that religion is true. Or rather, that one religion is true, because of course they can't all be true. In fact, our opponents here stand for 2 distinct and mutually incompatible faiths. Was Jesus Christ the Messiah? The rabbi and Dennett are not likely to agree on that point. As Bertrand Russell pointed out over 100 years ago, even if we knew one of the earth's religions was true, perfectly true, given the multiplicity of faiths, given their mutual incompatibility, all believers should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability. But before I go deeper into this issue of religious truth, I just want to illustrate how confused a person must be to argue that it is reasonable to believe in God because religion is useful, because it gives life meaning, because it makes people more moral than they otherwise would be, as the rabbi suggested, because it makes people happy, any of the benefits you could imagine of religion. Okay, imagine you're walking down the street and you run into an old friend, and he looks radiantly happy. You ask him what's going on in his life, and he tells you that everything changed for him the day he realized that he was destined to marry Angelina Jolie. It might occur to you, ask, why does he believe this? I mean, Angelina Jolie is, after all, one of the most beautiful and famous people on the planet. She's not incidentally married to Brad Pitt. They have something like 27 children at this point. Okay, what if your friend, sensing your skepticism, said, "You clearly don't understand. This belief gives my life meaning. Okay, I now know my purpose in life. It's to be Angelina's husband." What if your friend said that this belief has made me a better person? I'm now incredibly kind to children, anticipating having to raise Angelinas once Brad leaves. Or what if your friend said to you, "You can believe whatever you want, but I wouldn't want to live in a universe where I don't marry Angelina Jolie." Okay, it should be quite clear at this point that your friend has lost his mind. Okay, and it's probably a dangerous person, and yet this is precisely the kind of talk that so often passes for wisdom in religious circles and may attempt to pass for wisdom here. Certainly the morality argument is of that sort. Beliefs are not like clothing. Okay? Comfort and utility and attractiveness cannot be our conscious criteria for adopting them. To believe a proposition, you have to believe that you have good reasons for believing it. And the effect that this belief will have on your life cannot be among those reasons. And this is what it is to be clouded by bias. This is why we have phrases like wishful thinking and self-deception. to really believe that there is a God is also to believe that you stand in some relation to his existence such that if he didn't exist, you wouldn't believe in him. How does the supposed usefulness of religion fit into this scheme? It doesn't. So let's return to this question of truth. It's very common for people to say there's no conflict between religion and science because they relate to different subject matters. Okay, this is a lie. Religion and science both make claims about the way the world is. They make incompatible claims about the same reality, and they make these claims based on very different standards of evidence and modes of argument. It should be quite clear that there's a conflict, a perfect conflict, between demanding good evidence for what you believe and being satisfied with bad evidence or no evidence. So religion and science are in conflict because there's no way to disentangle religious and scientific truth claims. The claim that Jesus was born of a virgin, say, it's a central claim to Christianity. It is also a claim about biology. The claim that he rose from the dead and will return to earth is a claim about history. It's a claim about the human survival of death. It's a claim apparently about human flight without the aid of technology. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, while they disagree on many things, all agree that on the day of judgment, every person who has ever lived will be physically resurrected. Just which scientific laws does this violate? One's tempted to say all of them. If the basic claims of religion are true, science is so blind to this underlying reality, and the laws of nature are so susceptible to supernatural modification as to render the whole enterprise of science ridiculous. If, on the other hand, the basic claims of religion are false, most of the people on this planet are profoundly confused about the nature of reality and beset by quite irrational hopes and fears. And many people are simply wasting their lives and spreading delusion, often with tragic results. It seems to me no thinking person can be indifferent between the two sides of this dichotomy. Now, it's often imagined that non-believers like myself must be in principle closed to spiritual life. This is not true. You can have a deep spiritual and ethical life without lying to yourself or to your children about the nature of reality, without pretending to know things you do not know. There's nothing that prevents a non-believer from experiencing ecstasy and self-transcending love and rapture and awe. In fact, there's nothing that prevents a non-believer from going into a cave and practicing meditation for a year like a proper mystic. What non-believers don't tend to do is make unjustified and unjustifiable claims about the nature of the cosmos and about the divine origin of certain books on the basis of those experiences. That is a difference worth noticing. So I want to suggest to you that whatever is true about our circumstance, ethically and spiritually, can be discovered now and can be talked about in language compatible with our growing scientific understanding of the world and of the human mind. Whatever discoveries are there to be made about how to maximize human well-being can be talked about in language that is not an outright affront to all that we've come to know in the last 2,000 years. And to subscribe to one of the Iron Age religions, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is to make the tacit claim that is impossible, that there is, in fact, no way to understand our circumstance using the tools of our modern understanding of the world, that some measure of superstition is necessary, some measure of mythology, that we have to lie just this much. The point is, we can place our confidence only in human conversation. And the question is, do you want to place it in a 21st century conversation where we have all of the world's literature and learning available to us? Or do you want to place it in a first century conversation or a 7th century conversation as preserved in one of our holy books? Thank you very much.
Fuimos aquí los mexicanos, Dinesh D'Souza, quien nos podrá aportar, además, para quien quiera profundizar. Tiene grandes libros sobre estos debates, se ha conocido mucho todas las religiones, es un culto en todos los temas. Dinesh D'Souza, welcome. 9 minutes.
Thank you very, very much. I want to rise to Sam Harris's challenge, which is the idea of trying to address issues of religion, God, immortality, but in a 21st century way. I want to examine the compatibility or incompatibility between science and religion. But for me, these are not purely abstract or theoretical questions. A few years ago, my dad died. About a year ago, my best friend got cancer. And he's a very successful entrepreneur. And he said to me, Dinesh, the apparent normalcy of our everyday life is a sham. We basically live every day as if we are never going to die tomorrow. And he says, suddenly I wake up and discover I am going to die tomorrow. He says, all my past achievements, all my current projects, all my future plans are instantly jeopardized by this great wrecking ball, death. Now, I have just published a book about life after death. It's called Life After Death, The Evidence. Why the evidence? Because I've believed in life after death since I was a child, but I believed it in a childish way. I believed it on the basis exclusively of faith. Now as I get older, I have a lot of questions about it, and that faith has to be scrutinized in the light of evidence. Here's the problem. The atheist is posing as the champion of reason and science and evidence. I want to begin by showing that on an issue crucial to religion, is there life after death? The atheist is not only as ignorant, but more ignorant than the religious believer. Here's why. If you said to a religious believer in this room, do you know if there's life after death? Do you believe that there's life after death? The religious guy would say, yeah. How do you know? Well, I know because it says so in the book of Daniel, or it says so in the book of Revelation. I know based on the Bible. In effect, God told me. Now, the atheist will be chuckling and laughing at this point and saying, that's preposterous. The religious believer doesn't know. No one has been to the other side of the curtain. No one has interviewed dead people. So the believer is claiming knowledge that the believer cannot possibly have. And this is, in a sense, true. But what if we were to turn the camera around and say to Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, or Daniel Dennett, do you believe there is life after death? They will say no. And you say, well, this is very interesting. You haven't been to the other side of the curtain either. You haven't interviewed any dead guys. What information do you have that the religious believer doesn't have? And the answer is none. And so the atheist and the believer are in exactly the same position. Both are making a truth claim, and both are totally ignorant. Both are stating a belief on a position on which neither one has any evidence at all. Now, I should say, a Christian. Sam Harris said earlier that there's a lot of incompatibility on our side of the aisle. This is not true. Christianity happens to be the only religion in the world that holds another religion, Judaism, to be absolutely and completely true. That's why in Christianity the New Testament is put on top of the Old Testament, and both are Holy Scripture. But I want to look at the issue of life after death in the time I have in a scientific way. And the argument I want to make is that this idea, preposterous though it seems, is in fact supported by the best empirical and scientific evidence we have now. I want to begin by talking for a moment about physics. Because as a Christian, if you were to ask me, do you believe there's life after death? I would say, on faith, I believe yes. And you say, well, where's it going to take place? And I say, well, it'll take place in heaven. You say, well, where's heaven? Is it up in the sky above the clouds? I'll say no, Christians, like Jews, believe that heaven is another realm. It's a place that's eternal. God is eternal. What does eternal mean? Outside of space and time. And then you say, well, don't you believe that when you live on after death, your soul will be united to a body? And I would say, yeah, Christians believe that your soul will be reunited to a resurrected body, but it's going to be different than any body we have now. It's going to be a material body, but in some senses it will be incorruptible. It will last forever. Now, 200 years ago, if you said this, it would make absolutely no scientific sense, because we lived in a Newtonian universe. And if you raise the question of a realm outside the universe, there was no outside. Space and time are presumed to extend infinitely in all directions. If somebody were to say to you, space stops at that wall, you would say, ridiculous. There's what's on the other side of the wall, more space. Today, however, if you send your son or daughter to a local university, an introductory course in physics, they will learn right away that not only did the universe have a beginning, the Big Bang, but space and time also had a beginning. Another way to put this is that space and time are properties of our universe. Beyond our universe, no space, no time, or different laws of space and time. Today, scientists will speak about hidden dimensions, other realms, multiple universes. What do we know about multiple universes? Not a whole lot, but one thing we do know: the laws that they operate under, if there are any laws, are not the same as the laws of our universe. Moreover, today, scientists say that matter, in the Newtonian universe, they would say resurrected bodies that live forever. This is crazy. We know what matter is. It has defined and fixed qualities. But today, scientists will speak about dark matter and dark energy. And what do we know about dark matter? That it has attributes or qualities different from any matter that we have encountered or is detectable by any scientific instrument. And if you add up all the dark matter and dark energy in the universe, what percentage of total matter and energy does it amount to? 95%. And so when the atheist, but pulling himself into false superiority, says, well, this idea of bodies, material bodies that last forever is ridiculous, the answer is, sorry, pal. Why is it ridiculous? It's ridiculous because we know what matter is. But how can you know what matter is when you only have 5%? My point is that we should be a little modest in the arrogance of our atheism. Why? Because modern science itself has opened up possibilities. It has shown us wider horizons than we knew before. Now, the issue of life after death ultimately is an issue on which certain knowledge is not possible. Why? Because, as Shakespeare said, death is the undiscovered country. We don't know. And therefore, it might seem that the intelligent position when you don't know is agnosticism. I'm going to suspend judgment until the facts come in. I want to suggest that this is actually the dumbest position of all. And here's why. Imagine if you are dating a woman and trying to consider the question of, should you ask her to marry you? Now, the fact is, you can use all the reasonable knowledge at your disposal, but if you say, what is life with this woman going to be like for the next 50 years, you can never know. So you say, okay, since I cannot know, I'll be an agnostic. I'll wait for the data to come in. But the data will never be in. If you keep waiting, she will marry someone else or you will both be dead. So the point is that agnosticism is, from a practical point of view, a foolish position. We are all in the position of jurors. We're facing a question, and as Kierkegaard said, life has to be lived forward. We have to make a decision. We have to act. If we believe in life after death, it's a decision that is not only supported by truth, but good for us. Thank you very much.
¡Wow! ¡Qué mañana! Señoras y señores, también alguien, un líder intelectual sin duda alguna, quien quiera meterse a fondo estos temas y ser un rebelde y un contrarian, como se diría en el sentido estricto de la palabra, uno tiene que conocer a fondo a Chris Hitchens. Welcome, Chris.
Buenos dias, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming. You might not think it to look at me, but my background is a British family of the Royal Navy. And the examination for captaincy in the Navy used to be a very demanding one. You can read it in the novels of Forrester, and maybe some of you have read Jack Aubrey, getting the nautical commission. Came a day when a young man was sitting for his exam, and he was asked what he would do if a great wind got up and was blowing him towards the rocks. And he said he would tack to starboard and pile on extra sail. They said the admirals, what if the wind continues to blow you towards the rocks? And they're on the port side. He said, I continue to tack to starboard and I'd add another mainsail, or stud sail. And they asked him the question again, and he gave the same answer. And finally, one of the admirals said, where are you getting all this sail from? And the young captain-to-be said, the same place you're getting all that wind from. The relevance of my story, which you must already be asking yourself about, is this. What matters is not what you think, but how you think. And all the discoveries have been made, and all the enlightenment that's come to us is from the scientific and the philosophical method, not that of a priori assumptions of faith or the belief that wisdom comes from revelation. So now we know what the church used to tell us wasn't possible, which is that we are a primate species produced by evolution on an earth where 99.9% of all species hitherto, I won't say created, that have hitherto appeared, have already become extinct. And now a good number of religious people will now accept that, but it took them a while. And you can see the process by which they try and explain things away and then try and take credit for them. At first it was argued that God had put the fossil bones in the rock so people's faith could be tested. Nice try. Didn't last long. Then the various attempts, which still go on, to try and ban the good news of evolution. And then now many Christians, and some Christian authorities, and some Jewish ones too, say, no, of course it did all happen, and it's amazing to look at the evidence and the extraordinary scope and variety and even beauty of it. In fact, come to think of it, it proves that God must have been even cleverer than we thought. Now, you'll notice that there's something completely useless about this argument. It doesn't teach you anything, and it cannot be falsified. And an argument that supposedly explains everything invariably explains nothing at all. The physicist who discovered the Big Bang, I'm moving from evolution now, was actually a Catholic priest in holy orders and a professor at the University of Louvain. And after his quarrel with Einstein about general relativity and his hypothesis of the Big Bang, he went to the Pope and he said, look, this is how I think everything began. In fact, I think it's a sure thing. And it's very important. And the Pope said, well, if you're right, I can have it taught as dogma in the schools, if you like, so everybody has to believe it. Now, you see again the difference of method and approach. That wouldn't have been a gain for the theory of relativity or for the study of physics, to have it preached as revealed truth. We still don't know a great deal about what happened in the first instance of our cosmos. We still don't know quite how the quantum works. We know it does, we don't quite know why. And therefore, I'm going to argue in the time I have that the late, great Stephen Jay Gould, a non-believer, was wrong when he said that religion and science can be made compatible. I'm very glad that there's a counter up there. I wish you could keep your eye on it as well. Every single second, a star, like our own, the equivalent of our own, blows up and goes out. That happens every second, okay? If I keep to time, see if you can imagine this. Our brains aren't really constructed to imagine it very well. If I keep to my time, 540 great stars and suns would have vanished from the cosmos. It's a sobering thought. We're fortunate in being around to observe the continuing effects of the Big Bang and the mass destruction that it's unleashed. Future generations, if there are enough of them, won't be able to observe it so well. Why is that? Because as the Hubble telescope has shown us, the man for whom the telescope was named, Edwin Hubble, was slightly wrong. He knew the Big Bang was still going on. He knew the universe was still expanding. But he thought the universe rate of expansion would start to slow. What's been discovered by studying the red light shift is to the contrary. It's blowing apart much faster than we thought, and with huge, massive swathes of actual current and potential and future destruction. Soon, two galaxies, you can already see it in the night sky. You can see the future in the sky already, not as a vision, not as a revelation, not as an omen or a portent. You can see the Andromeda galaxy coming towards you. The collision between our galaxy and Andromeda is a certainty. It's inscribed in all the laws of physics. We know it's coming. It'll destroy some stars, but it'll probably succeed in making an amalgamation. May even become the only remaining galaxy. See if you think that religion is any help to you in considering that very real and important fact. A little while before this momentous event, I'm sorry to have to report, our own star will be disqualified from taking part in the grand merger because it, along with the 540 suns that will be lost to us in the course of my remarks, will blow up and swell up and burn out, and joining its 540 predecessors. And in more proximate news, what I might call more local, more suburban news, the luminosity of our sun is increasing at a very alarming rate, and in an easily foreseeable future, the temperature of our little planet will become that of Venus. In other words, it will be completely uninhabitable. And that'll be a small, but obviously to us very interesting development, and it will complete a grand slam. So far, all the other planets in our tiny suburb of a solar system are not conditioned to support life. They're either much too cold or much too hot, as large areas of our Earth are already much too hot and much too cold. Soon we'll join the too hot club, and that'll be a complete shutdown. And some people tell you that our universe and our cosmos was fine-tuned for existence, just so we could be here. Now, on truth claims, nothing I've said could be overthrown by any evidence. All we'll find out is more about it. We don't say on non-truth claims or faith claims that we know when we don't. I'm sorry, Dinesh, atheists do not say we know there is no God. We say, to the contrary, no argument and no evidence has ever been adduced that we consider to be persuasive. There's no reason to believe in evidence or argument, ontology or science. The same with the afterlife. Of course we don't say that we know there isn't one. We say that we don't know anyone who can bring any reason to think that there is. This is a very important distinction, and it's very regrettable that you miss it. And I'm sorry to say, Dinesh, that the immediate loser in an argument about things of which we can and can't be certain, where the only thing that is certain in these laws is the principle of uncertainty, the immediate loser, the man who has to leave the island, sorry, Dinesh, again, right away almost, is the one who says, I already know all I need to know. I already have all the information I need. Indeed, I've been given it by a supernatural body. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but when I hear people on the bus saying that they're talking to God, well, what do? Do you move closer to that person, or am I right in thinking you edge slightly away? I think that's a very good thing. I won't be able to complete everything I wanted to say. I've saved a bit for the next 4 minutes. The argument that some finally adduce against the laws of physics and the heat death of our universe is, well, don't spread the news because it would lead people to despair. I don't want anyone to despair. We have a number of consolations. We have our own solidarity, we have love, we have literature, we have our duties to each other. What leads to despair is to live the only life one has, being told what to do by despots and crackpots and pseudoscientists who claim the right to order us around in the name of God. Humanity has to outgrow and transcend that oldest of all the tyrannies. Thank you very much.
Christopher, extraordinary, as all of you. Thank you very much. Now, ustedes lo conocen, el autor de Evolution of God. Él está en contra de todos. Escuchémoslo.
Buenos dias. I want to say, first of all, I think I'm not quite as unfriendly as Andres made me sound. But it's true that when he emailed me and said, so which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be with Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, or do you want to be with Rabbi Boteach? Dinesh D'Souza, I said, I think I disagree with all of those people. So I'm going to tell you what I meant by that, and then if you can decide whether I belong on one side or the other, or whether I just have to go back and sit in my chair and be lonely. As for why I don't think I believe on the side of I don't belong on that side, Christianity and Judaism are both religions of revelation. They believe that God revealed himself to Abraham and Moses, and then Christians believe he revealed himself in the form of Jesus Christ. I don't believe that that's true. And more broadly, the way I think of the universe is as a giant machine, as a materialist system that runs in accordance with the laws of science. And I don't see anything around me that can't, in principle, be explained by the laws of science. So I don't assume the existence of a God that intervenes in history. As to why I don't think I'd feel comfortable on that side of the aisle, well, first of all, a number of atheists seem to me, notwithstanding what Christopher said, to speak as if they're sure that there is no God of any kind. And I think anyone who speaks that way is kind of failing to display the intellectual humility that all of us should display, given the fact that our brains were designed by natural selection to do very mundane things like find food and find mates, and not to understand the ultimate nature of reality. Okay, so I just kind of think I don't know what lies beyond. My mind isn't designed to understand certain things. But and I must say I disagree with the so-called new atheists, a label that's been applied to all three of these people. I think because they argue that they are said to argue that religion is bad and should be expunged from the earth. I think religion is not intrinsically bad. On balance, has been good. I have no desire to talk them out of their faith. But the biggest reason probably that most atheists would reject me and would kick me off of their team is that when I look at the kind of life on Earth, the system of life on Earth, I see some evidence of a larger purpose unfolding. Okay, that is to say, when I see the evolution through natural selection from one-celled life to intelligent life, and then I see how that intelligent life launched a second process of evolution, cultural evolution, including technological evolution, and how that has carried the social organization of that species to higher and higher levels, and now the global level. I think there is, in various ways, evidence of some purpose unfolding. Now, as I said, I view the system of life as a machine, but machines can have purpose. Airplanes are machines, their purpose is to fly. This does raise the question of what I think ingrained this purpose in life. And as I said, I don't believe in a God that intervenes. It could conceivably be a kind of God that at the beginning of time launched the universe, and the laws of the universe were such that life was likely to arise, and so on. So in other words, the purpose was written into the laws of the universe. That's a kind of what's called a deistic God. But I should also say that I think it's possible for something to have purpose that was not ingrained by a conscious being. Okay, so, and a number of philosophers agree on this point. So, for example, they might say that animals have a kind of purpose. They have goals, but it was ingrained by natural selection, which is not a conscious being. So I don't know where, if I'm right that there is purpose here, I don't know what ingrained it or whether there's a God. Now you might ask, well, does this purpose deserve the name divine, leaving aside the question of whether there's a God? And I would say, maybe, and the reason is this, that I see a moral direction in this, a moral dimension to this purpose. As I said in my talk on Friday, I think that technological evolution has brought people, ever since the Stone Age, in contact with more and more people at greater and greater distances, has made them interdependent with more and more people, and that gives them reason to work with those people, to acknowledge the humanity of those people, okay, which I think is moral progress. And now we're at a kind of climax of that process where the world is on the verge of a global civilization. But I think we will only succeed in trying to build an orderly global civilization if people everywhere get better at acknowledging the humanity of people who live far away, and at putting themselves in the shoes of people who are in very different circumstances, even in the shoes of their rivals and their enemies. In other words, I think we have to exercise our moral imaginations, people everywhere, if we're going to keep things on a peaceful and orderly path, okay? So you might say, I mean, to put it in mildly biblical terms, you might say that I think the salvation of the world in the kind of Hebrew Bible sense, the Old Testament sense of salvation, the preservation of a healthy society, depends on moral progress, on continued moral progress. And I think maybe you could call that, if that reflects a purpose, as I think it may well, you could call that divine if you want to. In any event, I'd say that this worldview of mine, even though I don't associate with this purpose necessarily with a God, it helps me orient my moral life, even my spiritual life. And so it does for me some of the things that religion does for people. William James, the American psychologist and philosopher, said that religious belief is the belief that there is an unseen order and that your supreme interest lies in harmoniously adjusting yourself to that order. Well, in that sense, maybe I'm religious, and maybe I belong on that side of the aisle. I don't know, although I have to say the book of mine that Andres mentioned, The Evolution of God, was reviewed recently by Dennett in Christianity Today, and Dennett, if I'm on your team, you've got a funny way of showing it, I've got to say. At the same time, it's been denounced by atheists at least as vehemently, so including some who are here. In fact, my friend Dan Dennett, I recently wrote an essay in the New York Times arguing that at least a certain kind of religion is compatible with science, and Dan wrote a letter very critical of that to the New York Times, which unfortunately the New York Times did publish. So in any event, I'm afraid, I don't have a team to be on. When Andres asked for the show of hands, who was with them and who was with them, I think the total was more than 100% of the audience, so that doesn't leave any room for me. So I guess I'll go sit in my chair and be lonely. But thank you for listening.
Ahora, 6 minutos, por favor, si cambian el reloj a 6 minutos, porque fue el acuerdo. Y vamos con Nassim Taleb. Bienvenido, 6 minutos.
Thank you very much. Many of you are probably wondering, what am I doing here today? No? Supposed to be here yesterday talking about the 4 experts about how economists are charlatans, how social science is composed of charlatanism dressed up in nice equations and stuff like that. Well, I got a problem. The very same people who trust the stock market distrust the priest. Okay? Stock market is something. In other words, you remember my turkey problem? Or not to be a turkey? To me, the perfect turkey is a person who trusts what they learn at school in social science, economics. Those who think that with science and equation we can track a lot of reality, we can't. I've tried. And those who think that it's good to invest your 401k in the stock market, at the same time doubting religion. We've been doing religion for a very long time. I have a problem with this discussion on many grounds. The first one is because religion is not about belief. I'll tell you later why science also is not about belief. But let me show you first. Everything in life is about decisions. But religion itself is not about belief. Yesterday, I was having drinks with Ricardo Salinas, and he got the point right away. I told them the credo, okay? What did credo means originally? Doesn't mean what we mean by belief in the scientific sense today. You realize that credit comes from credo. It means I trust. The credo, the initial credo, is about trust. Amen in Hebrew, and it's confirmed by the rabbi, is I trust you. Okay? Same thing in Arabic, same thing in Greek, same thing even in English. Belief comes from, is linked to beloved. Let me think about uncertainty again. We have had this scientific arrogance coming from the Enlightenment that is starting to blow up the world with us learning to make decisions based on information. Before the scientific Enlightenment, we were much wiser. What did we do? We knew how to take decisions based on incomplete information, incomplete understanding, and incomplete knowledge, what I call opacity. And that's what religions did. Then Ariely confirmed that if you believe in evolution, and you see that in all societies, evolution creates religion that evolve without breaking for such a long time, it means they got a purpose. Now we live in a world of human arrogance, epistemic arrogance, I call it. We humans cannot be trusted with knowledge. We automatically turn arrogant about knowledge. I said yesterday how if you give someone information, even if it's sterile information, and most information you get from the papers is sterile, okay? You will increase in overconfidence. You will witness a much higher increase in confidence than warranted by the information. We humans don't know how to say, I don't know. And there's one word in almost all religions in which people learn to say, I don't know. And you know what that word is? God knows. So this is how you deal with incomplete information, and we've done it for a very long time. Let me now talk about science. Why in decisions in life we don't care about science. We don't care about I'm glad Dan Dennett is here, about epistemology. Epistemology is about what is true and false. I learned that as a trader because I make bets on unlikely events. So if they tell me, do you think the market is going to go down? I say, no. The statement the market will go down tomorrow is not true. But yet I'm betting. Why? There's a small probability, huge payoff. We make decisions based on payoff. When I see water on a floor, do I drink it? No. But if someone told me, do you think do you have evidence that this water is poisonous? I say, no. I have no evidence it's poisonous, but I don't drink it. Life is about decision based on a code of probabilities. And religion helped us with that. Finally, there's one thing about negative advice. When you go to a bookstore, Barnes & Noble in the States, you have nothing but books telling you how to get rich in 10 steps, what to do, what to do, what to do. You cannot give someone negative advice. These are charlatans selling you stuff for $14, okay? If they know how to get rich, they wouldn't be there. Someone who tells you he knows how to do something typically is a fraud, typically, statistically. Those who tell you what not to do, don't get into debt, don't go into, typically, these examples don't have what I call survivorship biases, so these are better. Negative advice, unfortunately, cannot be conveyed as advice. It can be conveyed, as I heard the word dogma, as dogma, not as what we call kerygma, which is the opposite of dogma, something you can explain, talk someone into. You just set a dogma. You shall not borrow. Okay? You will not sell derivatives. You will not, period. You don't have to justify it. So this is what religion does. Thank you for listening for my first part.
Daniel Dennett, please.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Is there such a thing as a non-believing or atheist clergyman or pastor or priest? And the answer is yes. And in fact, there are lots of them. And I have just completed, with an assistant, a wonderful researcher, interviewing at great length and completely confidentially 6 non-believing preachers. These are 5 men and a woman. They represent 6 different Christian denominations. No Catholics, not yet. But we know there are priests out there who are in the same really terrible predicament of these 6 people. These are people who went to seminary after school with wonderful hearts, going to give their life to God, going to do wonderful good things, and they got in seminary, and they read about how the Bible was created by fallible people and what a political process it was. And they learned things they never learned in Sunday school. And some of them just walked away. Some of them walked away angry. They were the lucky ones. The ones who stayed made accommodations, and they had plenty of help learning from their professors how to make these accommodations. And they got ordained, and they got their church, and they got their pulpit. And they've learned how to talk to the congregation, which is not the way they talk to their professors. They have been initiated into a sort of conspiracy of silence. And for some of them, it eats into their souls terribly. Some of them figure out how to accept this, how to live with this. But they're all of them deeply troubled, and they can't get out. Carol Tavris yesterday talked about how hard it is for people to admit they're wrong. Well, when you've devoted 5 or 10 years to a church, preaching from the pulpit and say, I'm sorry, I don't believe anymore, it's extraordinarily difficult. It can ruin your life. When I considered the plight of these people, I got a new insight into what theology has been. I think for several thousand years, as the Stone Age religions have become domesticated, there have always been smart people, really smart people, reflective people, and they knew what they were supposed to say and what they were supposed to believe, and they just couldn't quite get their heads around this. So they very dutifully tried to figure out some way that they could accommodate their own intellectual integrity, their own intellectual honesty, with what they were told by their society they were obliged to profess. And being very clever people, they invented a lot of very clever theology. This was something they could say to themselves and almost believe it. And they could say it to the congregation, and it went down like sugar with the congregation. But times change, and science develops, and we learn more and more about the natural world. And so theology keeps having to reinvent itself to accommodate the new knowledge we have. And so we've seen the God of the Old Testament has gradually been revised and revised and revised and revised till we get to a position, as Robert Wright was just saying, what kind of a God does he believe in, if any? Well, not really any. Is he an atheist? No. The fact is that we now have such a plethora, such a bounty of different God concepts, all of them pretty much inconsistent with each other. And who knows which one you believe in? Those of you who raised your hands and said you're for religion, I wonder how many of you are like the pastors that we've just interviewed. You think religion is a wonderful thing, and you think you know what you're supposed to believe, but you've probably not given it all that much thought yet. Which God, which of the 5,000 different gods do you believe in? I dare say you don't know. But you think it's very important to say that you believe in God. Because, as we've heard, if you don't believe in God, and if the people in the world don't believe in God, then there won't be any right or wrong. And it will be just a chaos here on earth. Nonsense. That is the biggest lie that is spread by religions of all, that you can't be good without God. Of course you can be good without God. The meaning that using the minds that we have, that have evolved naturally over millions of years, and now we've added, as Robert Wright said, we've added cultural evolution, we've added science. If we together put our heads together, the morality that we come up with will be the morality that we should obey because we have chosen it. We have figured out this is the best morality to have. So we don't need religion for morality or for meaning of life.
Antes de pasar al segundo round, donde cada uno de ustedes tiene 4 minutos, each of you have 4 minutes for the second round. Quieranlo, piénsenlo, ¿habrá un propósito en la vida? ¿Realmente hay evidencia de lo que hay después de la vida o no? Esto es un gran tema, les pido un fuerte aplauso para todos y pasamos al segundo round. Rabbi, welcome, 4 minutes. Reloj 4 minutos.
Okay, let's make this more of a debate so we begin responding to each other. Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett Sam said that religion is a vestige of the past and let's finally dismiss this superstition. And then Daniel Dennett said we could have morality without religion. All I ask is intellectual honesty from the atheist side. Sam, if religion is superstitious and you believe it should be discarded, then you have to discard the whole thing. Why did you retain religious morality? I think you should give us a morality based on the facts of evolution. At least, to be honest, Nietzsche and Hitler were honest in that regard. Hitler was an evolutionist. This is what Sir Arthur Keith, the greatest evolutionist in Britain, said about Hitler. He said, to see evolutionary measures being applied vigorously to a great nation, we see Hitler devoutly convinced that evolution produced the only basis for national policy. This is why he pursued with organized slaughter so that his race could survive. I'm not saying evolution must lead to this. I'm simply saying that the idea of no, I'm not. It's not me. Excuse me. This is Sir Arthur Keith, who was the greatest evolutionist in Britain, a very moral man. He made the analogy. I'm simply reading it. And I said there's no connection, but he made the connection. All I'm saying is don't give us religious morality. Now, Christopher Hitchens, you said, let's not be gloomy. Let's love each other. Love each other? Evolution can't account for love. Love is an illusion created to ensure the propagation of the species. Love is something that you think you feel, but you really just want to ensure that your gene pool has the widest possible distribution. This is classical evolutionary doctrine. In fact, Robert Wright is one of the most honest men on this podium, because he wrote in The Moral Animal that indeed adultery is very natural. It's not natural to be monogamous. That should also follow. Where did we get this adultery thing from? We see that people don't really marry for a long time these days. As religion begins to recede, marriage does as well. All I'm saying is let's have ethics that are based not on religion. You can't say, I'm going to dismiss religion, but I want to retain its ethical code. You have to give us ethics that actually stem from the truths that you believe. So, for example, there are honest scientists out there. I said that Watson and Crick, two of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. Watson said that we should examine children after they're born to see if they should be kept alive. That makes perfect sense. It's for the good of the species, not humanity. You don't want to have disease carriers continuing. Evolution means that if you get rid of the weaker elements, then evolutionary progression is that much better. Watson himself said, 1994, you may remember this, that Africa has no hope because blacks are not as smart as whites. He had to resign his position after saying that. But again, this is classical evolutionary doctrine. Darwin said it. Thomas Huxley famously said that blacks are the missing link between whites and primates. Now, I'm not saying that any evolutionist would embrace this. In fact, let me be absolutely clear that evolutionists would reject this. I know that Daniel Dennett is a very moral man. I know Sam Harris is a very moral man. And I know Christopher Hitchens is a very moral man. But their morality comes from religion. It comes from the 10 Commandments. Do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery. So you can't say I want to discard it and I want to keep it. And my final question to the other side is this, a point that was completely ignored. Since the evolution of the first molecule of life has been calculated at 1 to the 242nd power, and since Julian Huxley said that the evolution of a horse would be a number of 1 with 3 million zeros after it, I simply ask, does that at least involve an element of faith, any faith at all, that it actually happened, or do you regard it as absolute conclusive fact? Thank you.
As we've begun to see, one of the problems with arguing in defense of God is that the evidence in your favor is either terrible or non-existent. And what we've heard from the other side and from the middle is that science is so complicated and counterintuitive and obviously incomplete that this leaves room for the God of Abraham. Okay, that's basically the argument. That the scientists don't understand everything. We don't understand how the first complex molecules self-assembled. Indeed, we don't. Scientists are the first to admit when they don't know. So the arrogance is very much on the side of those who would put their Iron Age faith in the place of genuine scientific ignorance. Now, the other side has been playing hide the ball with the articles of faith. Okay, let's be very clear about this. I will speak about Christianity specifically just for ease. Christianity is based on the notion that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. Okay, this is what you have to reject Christianity. You don't have to prove the universe to be absent of God. You don't have to, in the same way that you don't have to go find that Poseidon or Zeus or any of the thousands of other dead gods are absent from the universe. With Christianity, it is a textual claim about the veracity of the Bible. Consider what this amounts to. Bible scholars agree that the first Gospels were written decades after the life of Jesus. Decades. And of course, we don't have the original manuscripts. We have copies of ancient Greek manuscripts which have thousands, literally thousands of discrepancies between them, many of which show signs of later interpolation, which is to say that people added passages that then became part of the canon. There are whole books of the canon, like the book of Revelation, which for hundreds of years were not included because they were deemed false gospel. There are other whole books, like the Shepherd of Hermas, which you probably haven't heard of, but for centuries it was considered part of the canon and then was later jettisoned as false gospel. Generations of Christians lived and died being guided by gospel that is now deemed both incomplete and mistaken. Think about that. So this process, this all too human process of cobbling together the supposed authoritative word of God, is a very precarious basis to assert the claims of Christianity. But the truth is, even if we had multiple contemporaneous claims of the miracles of Jesus, this would not be good enough. Because miracle stories abound even in the 21st century. The devotees of the South Indian guru Satya Sai Baba ascribe all of the miracles of Jesus to him. He reads minds, he foretells the future, he raises the dead, he was born of a virgin. Okay, Satya Sai Baba is not a fringe figure. You might not have heard of him, but they had a birthday party for him a few years ago, and 1 million people showed up. There are vast numbers of people who think he's a living God. Okay, so Christianity is predicated on the claim that miracle stories, exactly of the kind that today surround a person like Satya Sai Baba, become especially credible when you place them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence, as attested to by copies of ancient Greek and largely discrepant manuscripts. We have Satya Sai Baba's miracle stories attested to by thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses, and they don't even merit an hour on cable television. And yet you put a few miracle stories in an ancient book, and half the people on earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that?
Here we are, flung into the world, and three of the most important questions we can ask is, why is there a universe? Why are we here? Where are we going? Now, in trying to answer these three fundamental questions, which are, in a sense, the orienting point of our life, we turn to science. And science's answer to these three questions are, don't have a clue, don't have a clue, and don't have a clue. Science, in a sense, is as ignorant of these questions as it was since the time of the Babylonians. Why? Perhaps it could be argued that the scientists don't know how to look for answers. Perhaps it is the case that the answers lie outside the province of science. But if we are looking to science to answer these questions, we are proving ourselves by experience to be idiots. Science hasn't given us anything, and it shows no prospect of giving us anything in the future. So now we can resort to promissory science, what I call the atheism of the gaps. We got no answers, but we're very humble people. We are ignorant, but at least we know we are ignorant. Therefore, trust us. I think religion has something a little better to say to the world than that. The argument against religion is that it keeps updating itself. It keeps adding stuff. Religion is, in a sense, judged by its, you might say, oldest proponents. Look what they said in the 7th century. Now, interestingly, what the atheists are doing is applying a double standard. Science is judged by its latest, smartest, most advanced representatives. Religion is judged by its oldest, least knowledgeable adherents. In other words, we don't judge science by the arguments of Democritus or Thales. We judge it by the arguments of, say, Stephen Hawking. But if science can progress, why can't religion? Why can't religious knowledge or moral understanding also grow? So I think this idea that religion is frozen is a fallacy. The majority of people in the world believe in God, believe in immortality. And here we have 3 of our most eminent atheists here to tell us why we're wrong. What arguments have they given us that command even a modicum of assent? None. All they have given us is condescension, sarcasm, intellectual superiority. Not a single argument that the 99% of people in this world who hope for a better life and believe in God are wrong to do so. Now, their argument really comes down to this. The absence of evidence is evidence of absence. In other words, if we don't know about something, we should believe it doesn't exist. I want to suggest why this is actually an unscientific and very foolish way to think. We can sort of see it by stepping outside the debate and applying it to some other issue. Let's consider a simple question that's a very relevant question today. Is there life on other planets? And the answer is, we're not sure. We don't know. Along comes the atheist who says the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. We have not found life on other planets, so there's no evidence. Therefore, there is no life on other planets. Is this an intelligent position? No, it is stupid and premature. Why? Because we may not know how to look. It may be that there is. So the fact that there is no evidence is evidence of nothing. It may be evidence of the poverty of our imagination, the ineffectiveness of our instruments. The bottom line of it ultimately is, when we look at the evidence, we find the religious believers are right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honestly, Dinesh, what complete piffle you're allowing yourself today. Scientists will tell you in advance of what it would take to disprove their belief. A great biologist at JBS Haldane, his name, was once asked, okay, what would it take for you to stop believing in evolution by natural selection and random mutation? So rabbits' bones in the Precambrian layer would be pretty decisive. We'd have to give up on that if that was so. Einstein said, if my theory works, there will be an eclipse off the west coast of Africa at exactly this time, not exactly an eclipse, a solar event, describable in advance, off the coast of Africa at this time and place. And it did happen. The theory was not considered scientific until then. Have you heard, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, anything like that from the other side? They say, this is what it would take to make me stop believing in something which I believe to be true without any evidence at all. No. Nor did they have the courage to use the following words: revelation, salvation, the conquest of death. To be religious is to be a theist. To believe in God is to be a deist. Deists don't believe that God intervenes. Theists do. Did you hear any claims of divine intervention from the other side? Did they have the moral courage to say that you can live eternally, perhaps if you only join one church, but special one, but you can live eternally if you have enough faith. No. Do they believe it themselves? I certainly hope not. Do they allow in any of their presentations, any of their amazing presentations, that they are making extraordinary claims? They're making supernatural and superhuman and divine claims. They're claiming to know God, what God wants of you, what he wants you to eat, who he wants you to sleep with, in what position, on what days of the week you should eat this or that, what animals you should avoid devouring. They claim to know something that we claim is not knowable. Now, which of those claims is the more plausible? And they don't concede that extraordinary claims involve extraordinary evidence, which is why evidence is such a casual thing with them. However, we do have extraordinary evidence that I laid out earlier of how our cosmos originated and how our DNA has been found to be sequenced. And some of these things are lovely to contemplate, and some of them are rather sobering. But none of them require a God. Now, you reflect again on what I said about the death of a sun every second, about the impending collision of the galaxies, about the rapid expansion rate of the Big Bang, and you ask yourself, I can't tell you this isn't happening without a purpose. I certainly don't have enough knowledge to say that, but I can say with reasonable certainty, I don't think all this was undertaken, this vast creative destruction, so that one primate species on one small planet could hear the Pope telling them that AIDS may be bad, but that condoms are worse. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what could be more self-flattering, pathetic, and yes, superstitious than that? I'm going to close with a wager. If those of you on the other side of this argument, who've already voted, think that religion makes people behave better, you'll have to answer this question. And I'll be here afterwards. I've asked it many times in public to many religious authorities. You have to name a moral action taken or a moral thought or statement made by a believer that I could not make because I'm an unbeliever. You have to show there's some relationship between morality and faith. You won't be able to do it. Whereas I can tell you, in reply to Rabbi Shmuley's disgusting innuendo, Adolf Hitler's first treaty was with the Pope, and they both stuck to it. Adolf Hitler's birthday was celebrated in every pulpit in Germany every year. Adolf Hitler told the cardinals of Germany he was only doing to them what the church had, to the Jews, what the church had done to the Jews for many centuries, and he was more or less right. And it's disgusting to be told he had Darwinian authority for that. I rest my case. Thank you.
I'm going to start clearing apart some statements I heard that make absolutely no sense. The problem with science is that you go to school and they tell you what has worked. We don't have the real history of science. Let me give you the history of science, and let's talk about what they call scientists are good at dealing with evidence. Up until very recently, about 70 years ago probably, anything that took you away from the doctor extended your life. Religion helped us satisfy the illusion of control just because the doctor, visiting a doctor in France in the late 19th century multiplied your chance of death by 8. Going instead to a cathedral and praying, aside from the therapeutic effect, would take you away from the doctor. Science has not been very good at saving lives, I'm sorry. Has not been very good at dealing with evidence. We know that from history of medicine. And even today, I don't know if you know it, but today, people tell you, well, we live longer. We live longer in spite of the family doctor. We live longer because we can cure some traumatic things. We live longer because of sanitation. We live longer a lot of things. But we know from data that when hospitals have strikes and we suspend elective surgery, we don't live longer. We don't live less, okay? Second point about belief. There are two domains. One I call the holy and the other I call the empirical. Using terms made for the holy and applying them for the empirical doesn't make sense. But using empirical terms and applying them to what is not empirical, not observed, non-observable, makes no sense. To give you an idea why you don't ask for evidence when religion is there to guide a behavior in some ways, when you go to a movie and you're watching a scene and there's blood in the scene, okay? Do you, like, suspend your belief for a minute and say, this is not tomato juice? You don't make that effort. You just go for the ride. Anybody trying to analyze art in terms of science is a fool or an autistic person, okay? But you don't analyze science in terms of art. They are effectively two domains of behavior. The problem that we have today is that the domain managed by science is vastly smaller. I'm a statistician, so look at numbers. What we can manage by science, things that we do for which we have scientific evidence outside of papers, are very small. And when I talk about science, I don't talk about Einstein relativity, because that's what gets the press. I talk about every day, how many papers do you have? You have millions of scientific papers, okay? Millions of things with false beliefs held in them. Science is a fight, not against a scientist, to convince a scientist, but it only improves when scientists die. Giving a bad name to religion because they can't prove or disprove their statements, okay, is using terms that are completely bogus when you have complete incompleteness of information. Finally, I repeat my point I made earlier about the mind abhors a vacuum. I'm citing Jon Elster. If you remove religion from our mind, what are you going to put in place? Tell me.
What are you going to put in its place? And I'm going to answer that one first. What we're going to put in its place is secular, rational morality, where we treat each other with respect and listen to each other's ideas and don't let anybody use any holy text as a trump card, as an argument winner. We're going to do this the way we've always done it. Yes, there's been huge change in religion and in science, but look at the difference between how this has happened. In the case of science, we've used the scientific method to refute theories that were good tries but were mistaken, and the very fact that you're comfortable sitting in this building and you're not afraid the roof is going to fall on you means that you know how secure scientific knowledge is on literally thousands of topics. Maybe not on economics, that's Nassim's specialty. But setting that aside, how has religion proceeded? First of all, I point out to you, there's not a person in this room who would live by Old Testament morality, who would live by the Ten Commandments as they appear in the Old Testament. None of you. None of you. And why? Because over 2,000 years, people have decided that that's not really those aren't really the right moral answers. So what's happened is that we, working together, have adjusted our thinking. And we've decided that slavery is wrong. We've made lots of adjustments to our morality, and we're going to make more, no doubt, in the future. And because we are going to be the ones that make these adjustments, we will be responsible for them, and they will have much more hold on us than if somebody says, well, we got that from one of the holy texts. Well, so what? So what? If it's what we all agree on, that's what matters more. Where are we going? Why is there anything rather than nothing? How did we get here? Science can answer some of those questions, and to the extent that science can, religion has now fallen in place pretty well behind. Although there are still bizarre outbreaks of just plain ignorance, for instance, about evolution. Shmuley, you really should read some of the fine books out there. Your ignorance about evolutionary biology is simply breathtaking, and you have no business saying the things you say without knowing more about the relevant science. In particular, the idea that evolutionary biology renders morality somehow crude and there's no such thing as love or there's no such thing as justice. That is just a calumny. That is just a bizarre caricature of the truth. The way theology has evolved over the years is not by changing in response to evidence so much as in thinking, well, now, what can we possibly say that will continue to bring the flocks into the congregation? How can we couch these our response to, for instance, new advances in science, so that people won't simply walk away from religion? So theology is it's a bizarre sort of religion design where the user is the congregation, and we tweak the design of the religion to fit the user.
Okay, I have 4 minutes to antagonize as many people on this stage as possible. I'll start with Dinesh, who says that science offers no answers about the meaning of life questions. It's true that I don't see any definitive answers coming out of it. I think it does offer us clues. What I'm trying to do is make the most of those clues and begin constructing an answer. And I think you'd agree, Dinesh, that if indeed humans are created by God for a purpose, and the purpose would be in some sense reflected in our nature, surely the rational part of human nature has got to figure centrally in that purpose. And so you would think that God wants us to use our brains to figure the situation out rationally. Rabbi Boteach, I also would like to question your evolutionary biology. You said that evolution cannot account for love. That's certainly not true. I'm not sure you meant that. I think in a way you mean that the evolutionary explanations for love would seem to invalidate love, because evolution depicts love as something that the genes fill us with for their own purposes in a certain sense. I don't see why that has to invalidate love. In fact, that is one of the reasons that I think maybe nature has some purpose. The fact that love, I think, was a very likely outcome of evolution, because the logic behind it, kin selection, is so powerful. And so I think that what the genes are doing is giving us a feeling that because it fills us with compassion for people and a truer understanding of that person, brings us closer to moral truth. And I think it's certainly possible that the genes could fill us with feelings that correspond to something that is in some sense moral truth in some kind of transcendent sense. Dan, I think in asserting that the morality thing is no problem, you're really being a little facile. I certainly know a lot of atheists who are wonderful people, but I'm not sure all of them have really thought the matter through. And I think certainly a philosopher who asserts casually that evolution, Darwinism, creates no problems for morality is being a little too simple. Darwinism tells us that our moral intuitions are just these byproducts of natural selection. I think that should make us skeptical of them. And once you become skeptical of all your moral intuitions, it's not so clear where you start in building a morality. I've tried to do it myself. I think I've succeeded for my purposes. I've tried to build a morality in a secular context. I don't think it's easy, and I don't think it's the consensus of philosophy that it's validly doable. Now, the Christopher and Sam, I would say, are the best exemplars of what bothers me about the new atheism, which is that I think it's kind of like a kind of a fundamentalism. You know, religion doesn't bother me. It's just fundamentalist religion. It's just the religious people who feel compelled to annihilate alternative belief systems. Okay, whether that in various forms. And I think the new atheist, because an atheist I have no problem with, but part of the definition of a new atheist is because they believe religion is bad. They want to make it their life's work to get rid of it. It's not the way I want to do things. I think it's actively counterproductive. I mean, Sam, I hope I'm not caricaturing your view when I say that you think that the way to handle the terrorism problem, because you think it originates with religion, which I don't think. I think it has deeper causes and facts on the ground, but maybe this is a caricature. You think that the way to win the war on terror is to go over to fundamentalist Muslims and say, you don't understand, your God doesn't exist. And I think if you think that's going to make things better rather than worse, you're crazy. I was raised religiously, around religious people. I think I understand the religious mindset. I do not recommend this as a strategy in the war on terror.
Vamos a la segunda parte del debate. Primero agradecer, esta pelea ha sido patrocinada, no solo la pelea, este festival, agradecerle muchísimo a nuestros patrocinadores antes que nos termine el tiempo. Muchísima gratitud a Aeroméxico, muchísima gratitud a Silly, muchísima gratitud a Domecq. Perdón, pero realmente gracias a todas estas empresas esto existe. Por ello un aplauso en el intermedio porque no quiero perder la oportunidad de agradecer a quien honor merece. Ahora vamos a la segunda parte del debate y le voy a pedir a cada una de las personas que están aquí, no todos tienen que, whoever wants to participate, welcome, it's not obligatory, no es obligatorio, no se pueden pasar de 2 minutos en la pantalla, 2 minutos vamos a poner, ¿sí? Si van a hacer una pregunta, if you make a question, no los van a responder, they won't respond now, pero lo pueden poner ante el público. ¿Quiénes de ustedes quieren participar? Por favor, vengan aquí a hacer una hilera para ahorrarnos tiempo. Bueno, todos los que quieran también venir de... No. Por favor, ya hemos pasado a varias gente del público. Máximo 2 minutos.
Yo voy a ser muy breve. Y esta es mi posición. Si ustedes creen, es mi creencia también. Yo considero que tanto la ciencia como la religión no es más que una construcción de nuestro cerebro. Y la pregunta que yo siempre me he hecho, si Dios nos creó y si Dios nos puede dar una explicación sobre todas las cosas, ¿por qué Dios se tardó tanto para darnos la 9ª Sinfonía de Beethoven? ¿Por qué Dios se tardó tanto para darnos una explicación acerca del origen de la vida? Si ustedes quieren, el debate puede ser interminable. Estamos en una democracia, yo soy muy tolerante, soy muy respetuoso de las creencias de todo el mundo, pero mi posición es, sí, que yo no necesito tantos dioses, yo necesito entenderme a mí mismo a través del conocimiento. La ciencia me ha dado un método para tratar de contestar algunas preguntas. No todas, obviamente, se pueden contestar, toma tiempo, acumulando conocimiento. Mis momentos de solaz, de reflexión, puedo poner la 9ª Sinfonía, tengo literatura, tengo cultura, entonces yo no necesito tantos dioses para vivir. Muchas gracias.
I'd like to pose a question, particularly for the religion side, a hypothesis that is falsifiable according to the scientific method for why religion exists, and would like an explanation for what is inadequate about this, since it has many substitutes for religion. And that is that we know that if we raise the cost to people for engaging in behavior that people in authority don't want them to engage in, if we raise the cost sufficiently, then we will stifle the behavior. That's why we have law. So we have, for example, the 10 Commandments and the threat of eternal damnation as a mechanism to raise the cost for violating the behavior that people in authority want people to engage in. Why isn't that an adequate account for why religion exists, which doesn't require anything about there actually being a God or any of the elements that religion normally subscribes to? And if we look, let's take the example of the Judeo-Christian God, particularly the Jewish God, since I'm Jewish. Let's take a look at that God and consider that the scientific method helps us to reconcile logical inconsistency and incompatible evidence, and religion doesn't seem to. So I was taught that there is one God, that Judaism is a monolithic religion, and yet the Jewish God is reported in the Bible to have said, I am the one God above all other gods, which apparently means that there were lots of gods, and it was just a power play. I'm the better one, please pay attention to me. It will be costlier to not listen to me than to not listen to others. What I would like then is an understanding of why this sort of economistic raise the costs argument is not sufficient, why we need the faith elements of this. Thanks.
A mí me gustaría añadir que, por un lado, me siento realmente privilegiado de participar en una reflexión en voz alta como esta. Es sensacional y os garantizo que esto ocurre en muy pocas partes del mundo. Pero, por otra parte, también me gustaría decir, Andrés, que no sé de qué me estáis hablando. O sea, yo viajo continuamente y en los aeropuertos hay mucha gente que me para, a veces joven, y para esconder que a ella le preocupa el tema de la muerte, hace referencia a su abuelo que está a punto de morirse y que está muy preocupado por el tema de la muerte, ¿no? Y yo le digo, oye, mira, no te preocupes porque el problema es exactamente el contrario. O sea, yo, a medida que he ido avanzando en el conocimiento científico, muy poco, he visto que los átomos son prácticamente efectos prácticos eternos, que las células las dividimos en somáticas que se mueren y luego las más importantes que se reproducen, las germinales, son inmortales. De manera que yo a mis amigos físicos les pregunto continuamente, oye, cuando uno se muere, ¿qué puñetas se muere? O sea que, y hoy creo que estamos en una situación en la que cada vez es más difícil distinguir entre la materia inerte y la materia viva. La segunda cosa, me queda un segundo casi, que quisiera apuntar y en lo que también me siento en cierto modo desconcertado por la discusión, es que a mí se me ha quedado en la memoria esa que me funciona tan mal, se me ha quedado grabado forever una cosa que vi en un metro de Londres, de Nueva York, en los años 60, que decía, ¿Is there a life before death? Y esta es la pregunta de verdad. ¿Hay una vida antes de la muerte? Después es que no me importa. Y por primera vez tenemos un futuro en el que pensar.
Typical philosophical intervention here. Let's define some terms. The problem I've got so far is that what is religion? It seems to me it's a moving target. And this is why sometimes the atheists fail to hit it. But it's also what I think allows the religious side to keep dodging the bullets. Okay, religion, I think, very simple terms, has about at least 3 different features. It is partly about belief. It is partly about practice, a way of life. It is partly about community, belonging, what brings people together. I think the problem on a lot of attacks on religion from the atheist side is they focus usually almost all on the belief. They forget the fact that it's also a way of life, a kind of community. And that's actually why a lot of people really value it. That's obviously also why they don't actually bother to examine the beliefs too closely. For them, it's much more part of the living experience. But on the other side, I'd say the failing is worse, because when people speak in defense of religion, they often emphasize those aspects, the way of life, the ethics, what it's good for us, and so forth. When it comes to belief, when the going gets tough with belief, they kind of set it to one side or avoid it, but they keep smuggling it back in every now and again. And I think I want a bit of honesty, really, on both sides, I think. On the atheist side, I want people to recognise that religion is much more than about a list of beliefs about God's heaven and so forth. But on the side of the religion, I want the honesty for people to stand up and say, actually, we do believe some things which has historical claims about Jesus' resurrection and so forth. And stop talking in general terms about the value of religion as though it's this amorphous, indistinct thing. In specific terms, specific religions almost invariably do make specific claims. I would like to see what some religious people do, which is that they actually have the honesty to give up a lot of those beliefs which things like science and so forth have made less credible. And they try and rebuild religion around those other aspects of it which do have value, the community, the belonging, and the practice. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Quiero agradecer a Andrés que en esta extraordinaria organización de un evento tan complejo, y quiero pedirles un aplauso para Andrés. Desgraciadamente hay un grave error en su organización y ese es haberme permitido el micrófono. No soy científico, no soy intelectual, yo represento, como cualquiera de los que están aquí, a un espontáneo que se subió a hablar en este debate centenario, que no termina hoy, ni mañana, ni pasado, sino que si estuviéramos aquí dentro de 400, 500 y 600 años, este debate continuaría, porque por fortuna no tiene fin. ¿Y por qué por fortuna? Porque debatirlo como lo hicimos hoy nos hace mejores seres humanos. Por desgracia, la religión está construida y la educación religiosa para hacernos mejores personas. Pero si nos vamos a las pruebas, a los resultados reales que vivimos, no a través de los últimos siglos, sino el día de hoy, las peores guerras que tenemos son por cuestiones religiosas. Tenemos una situación hoy en el mundo muy delicada y eso quiere decir que no nos está haciendo la religión mejores personas y este debate nos ayudará profundamente a entender no solo qué, sino por qué tenemos que cambiar y pensar no solo científicamente, sino como seres humanos para ser mejores. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. El debate efectivamente es centenario. En el siglo XVII, Blaise Pascal, una de las mentes científicas y filosóficas más brillantes que ha tenido la humanidad, trató estos mismos temas que hemos estado discutiendo aquí hoy. Empezó con un argumento ontológico y otro metafísico para tratar de demostrar la existencia de Dios. No pudo. Después se fue con un argumento más bien utilitario. Hizo una apuesta. Es mejor que exista Dios porque si Dios no existe, yo lo he perdido todo. Y en cambio, si Dios existe y yo creo en Dios, por lo menos me he ganado el paraíso. Tuvo la honestidad intelectual Pascal para entender que eso tampoco probaba la existencia de Dios. Entonces tuvo que llegar al final de su disquisición a decir, creo en Dios porque creo en Dios. Creo en Dios porque tengo una fe que está dentro de mí, hay una gracia que está dentro de mí y esa es la razón por la que creo en Dios. Todos somos diferentes, yo no tengo esa gracia, yo no creo que exista un ser supremo que maneje la vida de todos nosotros. Pero cuando le doy las buenas noches a mi madre, que es muy católica, no me importa que ella sea católica y que yo no tenga esa conciencia. Cuando tomo de la mano a Jocelyn, mi pareja, no me importa que ella sea católica y que yo no lo sea. Finalmente, nunca vamos a resolver el asunto porque el tema de Dios no puede ser resuelto. El tema de la existencia de Dios no lo podemos resolver los seres humanos, que somos por naturaleza definidos, somos por naturaleza imperfectos y no podemos conocer a un ser que es absolutamente perfecto. Pero ¿qué importa? ¿Qué importa mientras sigamos pudiendo tomar de la mano a los seres que queremos? Muchas gracias.
Como ustedes saben, en la segunda parte cada uno de los expositores tienen 2 minutos. El rabino tiene ahorita que tomar un avión, le vamos a pedir que termine con sus 2 minutos. Desafortunadamente, los demás expositores ya no lo van a poder contestar.
Please forgive me because I have to catch an airplane. I want to thank everyone for this phenomenal opportunity. I was going to say at the beginning of my rebuttal how grateful I was that this debate had not descended into any kind of name-calling. It's a shame that it always does. Professor Dennett, your knowledge of religion may not be up to par as well, but I would never use the words that you used in public because I'm too much of a gentleman. And I actually believe that how we treat each other reflects the kind of people that we are. We can debate these points without showing animus. Christopher Hitchens knows full well that that quotation from Sir Arthur Keith, the greatest evolutionist in Britain of the 20th century, was because after the war he was worried about a world where God would be purged, and he was not a religious man. And he and others, like Paul Johnson, the great British historian, pointed out that Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Stalin, Hitler, all pagan, in the case of Hitler, a pagan ideology, or atheist, totalitarian, communist ideologies, killed approximately 100 million people in the 20th century because people became expendable, because do not kill was decided by humans and not by God. He ruminated on how the evolutionary doctrines could have led to the Second World War, and I simply quoted it. Let me just say, however, any doctrine or any religion, because religion has also been guilty of serious violence in the name of God. Any religion that does not have ethics, and any system that does not have ethics at its center, where how you treat someone determines the person you are, is false, is a fraud. And that ought to always be reflected in how these debates are conducted. I'm sick and tired of just one thing, that we religious people are treated without a semblance of respect. Isn't tolerance also a virtue, my friends? Isn't just simple respect for one another? In every one of these debates that I always participate in, Christopher Hitchens says, disgusting that you quote from the world's leading evolutionist who mentions Hitler. But in the next sentence, he connects the Catholic Church to Hitler, as if they were responsible for Hitler. The point is, our humanity is something that ought never be compromised in these debates. I thank you all for listening. God bless you.
I'd like to make a rather dry point after that. There's been a lot of the discussion is centered around the question of whether an absence of evidence is evidence of absence. It's slightly the wrong way of constructing the problem. It's almost true, though. So the way to see why it's almost true is that we should, the degree of confidence we have in a proposition should modulate with the amount of evidence we have for it. If we had no evidence whatsoever for anything, we should have 0 degree of belief in any proposition. Very simply, there would be an infinity of possibilities. Each would be equally likely given the evidence we have. Therefore, the rational degree of belief would be 1 divided by infinity, which is approximately 0. Now, in the case of religion, we have, if there's an absence of evidence, which was what was apparently being conceded, then the appropriate degree of belief in the propositions is approximately 0. That's why it's almost true that an absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So, as some of you know, I'm from Sweden, and Sweden always comes very high up on a lot of statistics for childcare, for education, for a lot of good things. And it's largely an atheist country. And I was brought up by a father who was into philosophy, and I feel really upset about some things that comes from the religious side. There's no correlation here. I feel personally insulted by a lot of thoughts that my lack of believing that there is a God. I believe in us. I believe in joy. My brain lights up when I listen to Bach or when I'm touching someone. It's not a belief. It's a human being. And I actually find people who believe that something better is going to come in an afterlife. Maybe they put too much focus there. This is the life. This is your time. And to be kind to other people and respect other people and not bringing up Hitler, when we talk about atheists, because talk about name calling. And someone told me whenever you bring up Hitler in a conversation, you lose. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Yo quisiera cuestionar, como punto de partida, la misma pregunta inicial que Andrés nos hacía, en el cual ponía por un lado la religión y por otro lado la ciencia, como 2 elementos opuestos y sobre el cual tenemos que tomar una posición única en uno o en otro lado. Cuando hizo la pregunta, yo levanté las manos en las 2. Me hago la pregunta de una posible pregunta diferente, y es si pueden encontrarse, por una parte, la ciencia y por otra la parte, la fe en un ser trascendente. Y quiero subrayar que no estoy hablando de religión o de religiones. Cuando entro a mi vida, he encontrado buenos motivos para creer, pero también he encontrado buenos motivos para no creer. Algo que quisiera decir ahorita es que yo aprecio al científico serio y humilde que está abierto a la trascendencia como una posibilidad, pero también al creyente que después de una búsqueda consciente, personal y comprometida, sigue con la humildad de ese espíritu crítico, sin miedo a hacerse nuevas preguntas y a cuestionarse nuevos planteamientos. Y por último, diría que yo aprecio y respeto ese diálogo que puede haber entre unos y otros en un verdadero espíritu de diálogo.
Let me start by saying that I'm a non-expert on religion and I'm confused about my own. So let me say a few things about the religion I actually know something about, which is rational economics. Lots of people believe in rational economics, and the evidence is actually quite impressive against it. For example, how many of you have ever been driving and checking your text message while driving? Anybody? Okay. All of you are crazy in a sense, or incredibly stupid. You're taking incredible risk about your lives. You're endangering yourself and others. You're really not doing the right cost-benefit analysis. This, of course, is not the evidence that we use to debunk economics, but there's lots of things like this. Now, I think in some sense, regular religion is a little bit like standard economics. You know, I think from my perspective, we've debunked the scripture as written. At the same time, no scientist would ever tell you, let's throw away economics completely. Well, aside from Nassim. Nobody else will tell you that we should throw away economics. Instead, we should say, let's modify it. Let's think about what's the new economics. How do we actually create a new science that takes into account not just our beliefs about human nature, but also the empirical evidence. And the question that I have is whether religion can be like this. And I'm actually a little bit optimistic because recently in the last few years, the Dalai Lama has met with lots of scientists and actually starting to do experiments. And I think there is hope to think about how would religion get modified to think about science. How do we take both of those inputs into account and come up with something that we're probably not all happy with, but a bit more happy with. Thank you.
Well, for me, I just think this is the most amazing thing I've seen, like bringing two different forces that are being brought to us for us to choose. For me, just listening to the debate of, I believe in science, and I also believe in religion, because when I look at it, I may think maybe God must be the biggest scientist, the most cleverest being, bringing all the molecules and robots to work. And somebody like me, my life is defined by hope. And what gives me hope is, faith is what gives me hope to want to see tomorrow. Because I've gone through a lot. If I have no hope, then I'll just end myself. But because I believe tomorrow is going to be better, so faith gives me that, and that is the religion that has been established. But the thing that we go through is the laws that have been put, people manipulate them. We need religion. If we don't have it, there's no hope. I went to Sweden. It's an amazing country to be. But I've seen that a lot of young people and a lot of people commit suicide. Why do they commit suicide? No hope. So we need faith to give us hope to want to see tomorrow. But we need science to show us how to make clothes and do many things. So I go for both.
My question is, what does the world need now? But before I give a little answer, I want to thank you, This has been the 3 most unforgettable days of my life, not only because of the brilliant lectures that I listened to by my colleagues, but because of you. You took me into your heart, and for the students we danced with Friday night, you took me into your arms. And I will always remember that. The question of what the world needs now, you remember there was an old song, I think in the 70s, is Love, Sweet Love. That's the beginning, but it's not enough. And the Dalai Lama says we need compassion. That's the beginning, but it's not enough. In fact, I will be in a dialogue with the Dalai Lama in October at Stanford, and I will tell him, it's not enough for you to be compassionate if I'm suffering. Compassion makes you a better person, but what we need is heroes, as I tried to say at the end of my talk. Heroes are people who go beyond compassion to take the action to help someone else or a moral cause. So my sense is what we need, especially from the students, is to begin to think of yourself as an ordinary person who is ready to take an extraordinary act to help other people, to make other people feel special, because other people are special, but often not in their own mind. So when I'm coming here, the driver of the car is a Mexican student, and I ask him, what do you do when you're not driving a car? He says, I'm a student, I repair computers, I play drums and piano on the weekends. And then he says, I'm really very lucky because my girlfriend was pregnant and the baby, she didn't deliver. Had the baby delivered, I'd have to give up school, I'd have to work, I would have a low opportunity. So what we need to do is give students and everyone opportunities for success. And that's what corruption does. So part of being a hero is begin to say, not the cynical thing, well, corruption is part of Mexico. Corruption is part of Sicily. How do we begin at the very first step to oppose corruption? Because corruption takes opportunities away from young people.
Buenos días. Bueno, les voy a hablar desde el punto de vista del yoga, la parte científica que estudia a Dios. Unimos las dos cosas en un equilibrio. Les voy a hacer una invitación a todos aquí presentes. No busquen una verdad absoluta en un mundo relativo. Actuemos desde la no violencia para no polarizar el yo estoy bien y tú estás mal. Estamos hablando aquí, todos los presentes, desde el saber del ego, no desde el conocimiento de Dios. No se preocupen por lo que no saben, preocúpense por lo que sí saben. Seamos un Emmanuel Yal, donde podamos construir un mundo lleno de amor, de tolerancia y de igualdad. Tengan ecuanimidad en los puntos de vista y las opiniones de todas las personas. Tómenlo por igual. No hay cosas buenas ni malas, las cosas simplemente son. El autoconocimiento es el camino a la liberación y a la felicidad. El pasado es una ilusión, el futuro es un misterio y el día de hoy es un regalo, por eso se llama presente. Haz yoga, sé feliz, namaste.
Yo les quiero hablar hoy de la fuerza del amor, de esa fuerza que trasciende fronteras, que nos hace salir de nuestras propias ataduras, que va más allá, que no se entiende, que no es tangible. Y les quiero hablar de una mujer, una santa de nuestros tiempos, la Madre Teresa de Calcuta. Esa mujer que en un trayecto en la estación en la India oyó la voz de Dios y le dijo, quiero que vayas con los más pobres de los pobres. Ven, sé mi luz. Come, be my light. Métete en los agujeros más profundos. Quiero que ames a los que nadie ama, que estés en los corazones de los que no tienen esperanza, porque quiero que seas mi esperanza. Una vez, escuchando a un escritor judío, hablaba de que muchas personas que no creen en Dios hacen el bien, pueden hacer altruismo, pero la diferencia está aquí. Cuando alguien que se va a morir, que no cree en Dios, y alguien que va a morir y cree en Dios, ¿por qué estás dispuesto a dar tu vida? Que estés seguro, una verdad que realmente esté dentro de ti, que te muera, que al final de tu vida puedas morir tranquilo. Y nada más para terminar, una anécdota. Llega la BBC de Londres a Calcuta y llegan a la casa del moribundo, donde acogen a todas estas personas para que mueran con dignidad. Y en esos momentos la BBC no llegó preparada con suficiente luz, no tenían la iluminación necesaria. Y la Madre Teresa volteó y les dijo, no se preocupen, la luz que ustedes traen es suficiente. No tenían de otra, empezaron a grabar y cuando la BBC llegó a Londres a poner todo lo que habían grabado, Se quedaron impresionados porque todo se veía claramente. ¿Y qué recordaron? Las palabras de Madre Teresa de Calcuta. Ven, sé mi luz. Muchas gracias.
What a day. Les voy a pedir a los speakers, I will ask you a big favor. The point is to listen to the others. So you have been listening to a lot of speakers, not only from your sides, but from the audience. So if you could catch some of those things and dialogue with what you have heard, it will be very appreciated. Muchas gracias a todos. Yo le ofrezco una disculpa a todos los que quisieron participar. Entiendan la restricción del tiempo, pero les prometo algo. Desde hoy en www.ciudadelasideas.com hay un blog abierto porque todos tenemos no solo las ganas, sino la necesidad de ser y de expresar lo que tenemos y va a ser respondido. Yo se lo voy a pasar también a los speakers. Gracias por la comprensión.
Well, I want to return to this core issue, which is belief, because that really is the issue. Without belief, religion evaporates. Without belief, science evaporates. We're talking about claims and their evidence. And we're talking about what you think is true about the nature of the universe. Presumably you don't believe in Zeus. If someone stood here and said Zeus was the greatest scientist, you would not have applauded. Okay, let's talk honestly about what we think is true. The truth is that religion, as we speak of it, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, is based on the claim that God dictates certain books. He doesn't code software, he doesn't produce films, he doesn't score symphonies, he is an author. And this claim has achieved credibility because these books are deemed so profound that they could not possibly have been written by human authors. Please consider for a moment how differently we treat scientific claims and texts and discoveries. Isaac Newton went into isolation for 18 months, starting in the year 1665. When he came out of his solitude, he had invented the calculus. He had discovered the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He had single-handedly created the field of optics. No one thinks that this was anything other than a man's labor. And it took 200 years of continuous ingenuity on the part of some of the smartest people who ever lived to substantially improve upon Newton's work. How difficult would it be to improve the Bible? Anyone in this room could improve this supposedly inerrant text scientifically, historically, ethically, spiritually, in moments. If God loves us and wanted to guide us with a book of morality, it's very strange to have given us a book that supports slavery, that demands that we murder people for imaginary crimes like witchcraft. The true basis for hope in our world is open-ended conversation, and religion has shattered our world into competing moral communities. What we have to convince ourselves of is that love and curiosity is enough for us, and intellectual honesty is the guardian of that. Thank you.
I've learned a lot from being here. I want to respond, first of all, to this idea that religious people claim to know. The reason we use the term religious belief is because there's a difference between belief and knowledge. If I know something, I wouldn't say I believe in it. I may believe that hydrogen plus oxygen creates water, but I wouldn't say I believe in my brother. I know the guy. Doubt is an essential part of religious belief. Now, what about this Bible and its old wisdom? Let's take a central claim from the book of Genesis. The authors of the Hebrew Bible said that first there was nothing, and then there was a universe. This was, by the way, not said in other religions. In other religions, gods or God takes some pre-existing stuff and makes the world. The Hebrews said, no, there was nothing, and then there was a universe. Modern science declares that to be absolutely true. Now, the Hebrews did no experiments. They weren't scientists. They said God told us. 2,000 years later, the essential insight of the first book of Genesis is confirmed. Can we be good without God? The only example given by Dennett to show we can be good without God is slavery. But the truth of it is, slavery was like the family. It existed for centuries. No scientist mobilized to create an anti-slavery movement. It was Christians who did that. It was Christians who said, because we are equal in the eyes of God, no man has the right to rule another man without his consent. It was Quakers and evangelical Christians who mobilized the only anti-slavery movement the world has ever known. So anti-slavery is a religious, not a scientific achievement. Finally, on questions where we can't know for sure, like what comes after death, we have to ask what is good for us. If we believe nothing comes after us, we are like passengers on the Titanic. We can make all kinds of plans and rearrange the deck chairs, but the ship is going down. Thank you very much.
The rabbi calls for respect. I call for respect as well. I am happy to respect respectable opinions. My book, Breaking the Spell, set out to look at religion as a natural phenomenon, and a lot of people found the rather astringent, objective way in which I wrote the book to be offensive and not respectful of religion. And I said, if this were a book about the pharmaceutical industry or the oil companies or the banks or the stock market, would it be offensive and disrespectful? No. Well, I'm saying I'm just as respectful of religion as I am of these other important institutions. I don't believe that the pharmaceutical industry should be destroyed or that the stock market should be destroyed, but I think they have a lot to answer for and they should be fixed. I think the same thing is true of religion. And I think the only way we're going to make religions proper institutions for the 21st century is if we look at them objectively, carefully, factually, and not let them insist that we grant them more respect than we grant to the other institutions of society.
I would like to continue on my point that the mind doesn't like a vacuum and answer Dennett's point about his idea of rational choice, rational man. Because it so happens that my specialty as a statistician is rational choice decision theory. There is no definition of rationality, or no rational definition of rationality. What is rational for one of you may not be rational collectively, and vice versa. We have no definition. And what precisely religion does is by tinkering, find what social equilibrium is obtained through acts and sets norms. Rationality is itself normative. Religion is normative, but religion has done it so much better. That's the first point. Second point, when people tell me, look at what science did, and they point at the building not breaking, and they mention Newtonian mechanics, and they talk about quantum mechanics, and they talk about planes not crashing, we're only talking about what we have exhausted, which is linear, non-complicated, non-complex science. And now we're hitting the boundaries. Complexity has no mathematical solutions. Complexity is vastly complicated. All the tools of logic don't work with complexity. The weather is a complex system, but closer to us, your body is a complex system, which is why we still don't know much about the human body, in spite of all these people probing into it and knowing genes and so on. Too many nonlinearities, too much interdependence. So I don't want to hear this notion of science and people setting metrics made about linear science to try to judge what's evidence, what's not evidence. Forget about evidence and non-evidence. Figure out how we can live on a planet without blowing it up. Thank you very much.
Why would it matter if we blew it up? It belongs to God. He knows his own. He knows who's going to heaven and hell. Look, hard to know where to begin. The American Anti-Slavery Society was founded by people like Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin and other secularists and skeptics at a time when the whole justification for slavery, north and south and across the seas, was that it was validated by the Bible, which it is. Dinesh didn't attempt to deal with that question. I submit that if we knew half of what we know now about physics, and about biology and astronomy, the Abrahamic religions couldn't be founded in this day. None of them could be founded and believed in by people who knew what we now know. The human species is, let's say, at least 100,000 years old. It's probably much older, maybe 250,000 years. You have to believe this to believe in Abrahamic religion. You have to believe the following, that for, let's call it 100,000 years, humanity is born, doesn't live long, mostly dies in childbirth, dies of its teeth, dies in terrible wars, famines, plagues, dies in fear because it doesn't know why there are volcanoes, doesn't know why there are plagues, doesn't know why there are earthquakes or tsunamis. Fear, misery, shame, terror, cruelty of all kinds. And for the first 97,000 of those years, heaven watches like this. And then after 97,000 years of it decides, we can't let this go on, we'll have to intervene. But only in the most barbaric and backward parts of the Middle East will we show our face to people who can't read, who are terrified, who are ignorant, who live basically with and like animals. Now, I submit that whatever may be the case, whatever is true, whatever may remain to us to find out, and as Socrates says, the great definition of wisdom is having some idea of how ignorant you are, whatever the outcome is, morally, scientifically, or logically, that cannot have been the case. Religion is false. I take my stand. Thank you.
I think life is hard. I think it's difficult to be a human being, especially if you try to live a moral life, and I don't doubt that we're all trying to do that. And I think that everyone who responds to that challenge, including our atheist friends, do so by believing at least something that is not provable. I suspect that if you told me what moral beliefs get you by every day, I would be able to argue that at least some of them are not provable. And one thing that bothers me about the new atheism as opposed to atheism generally is it sometimes seems you're going around to other believers and saying, well, I'm sorry, but your way of getting through life, this difficult thing, is just less intellectually sophisticated than my way. And that just, it just sounds like a kind of a snobism and elitism that just rubs me the wrong way. I wish you would just be more willing to let people work out their own salvation. As the Buddha said, I wish that religious people would be as well. When American Christians go over to Africa and try to convert Muslims, they have to convert Muslims, and it just gives Muslims the idea that the West is a threat to their religion. I don't think that's constructive. What we need now for the world to get along together, we don't need a single world religion, but we do need doctrines of tolerance within each religion, and we've seen some progress there. The Catholic Church in the Second Vatican laid down, endorsed the idea that non-Christians are eligible for salvation. That was a great leap forward, even if the church maybe has become, slid back in some ways since then. But in any event, I think that really, we're talking about religion and science. I don't think they really need to be reconciled. For me, they do, because I was exposed to religion at an early age, and then to science. It's a personal issue with me. I'm trying to work it out. But what's really required for the salvation of the world is really not for religion to be reconciled with science, but just for the different religions to be reconciled with one another, and ideally with atheists. And so I close on a message of hope, I guess.
Quiero aprovechar 2 minutos, agradecerles infinitamente a todos. Yo sí me hago la pregunta que se hizo Luis Niño Rivera. Este es un debate milenario, tiene miles de años. ¿Quiénes somos? ¿Cuál es nuestro propósito en la vida? ¿Existe un propósito? Como dice Edouard Punset, más que preocuparse si hay vida después de la muerte, preocuparnos si hay antes de ella. ¿Cuál es el significado y el sentido de la vida en función de cómo entendamos la muerte? Probablemente lo que difiero de Luis es que a lo mejor en 300, 400 años este debate va a cambiar. Yo sí me imagino que en gran medida es una necesidad evolutiva creer. No digo de que haya algún creador que creó la evolución, pero que es una necesidad para adaptarnos, para sobrevivir. Tenemos una parte en el cerebro reptiliano de miles de años. A lo mejor en pocos años van a empezar a cambiar las cosas. Mientras tanto, lo que me agradezco y lo que agradezco a este momento y al tiempo y a la oportunidad es que estoy seguro que este debate, no solo en México, sino en muchas partes del mundo, va a generar otros debates y otros debates. Y va a ser unforgettable. No se nos va a olvidar. Y al final de cuentas, ¿cuál es el propósito? Ese. No creernos todo lo que pensamos. Y yo no pienso como Descartes, que primero pienso y luego existo, porque esto fue un exquisito manjar de pensamiento. Yo le agradezco a la vida vivirlo con ustedes. Sino, piensas, luego piensas que existes. Lo que sí no tengo duda es que sientes y consientes con el otro y con base en ello cambias tu conducta, me atrevo a decir en contra de alguno de los speakers, tu carácter, y te sientes más pleno. Por un momento tan extraordinario, tan exquisito, a ustedes, a todos ustedes, gratitud. Y si piensan distinto al otro, consientan, métanse en sus zapatos y sintámonos. Muchas gracias. Ahora, el momento que nos une a todos, la música. Un momento con tambuco. Muchas gracias. Bienvenido, tambuco.